Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I am Bearded Dev and we're doing another SQL tutorial today focusing on views. So what we're going to cover in this video, we're going to look at working with views, the advantages of views. We're also going to move on to schema binding and encryption. And the scenario we're going to be going through is that users have reported they don't want to keep writing complex queries and we need to come up with a solution. Now let's look at the advantage of views. So views can contain up to 1024 columns. That would be an extremely big view. I don't know when you'd write a view that large, but it might be a question that comes up on the exam if you are studying for Microsoft certifications at the moment. Views enable us to simplify complex queries, and that will become apparent when we move over to SQL in a moment. They also prevent user access to the underlying base tables, so we might not want a user to be able to do anything against those tables, and then a view can be quite advantageous to us. The disadvantage of views is that we cannot add parameters. Let's jump over to SQL now and we'll go through some examples. So I've got a query here, guys, which is just selecting a few columns from a few different tables. It just shows the customer ID, the customer name, order ID, order date, the title and the type of book as well. Now to get this information we need to join the customers table to our orders table, to our orders details table, to our books table. So if we wanted to keep writing this query over and over again, we've got to run this every time. So I'll just execute this query now, and this is what it's actually going to show. So a significant advantage of views is we could put this as a view, and that will enable us to not have to write this query every time. So we're going to start off by creating this as a view. Now initially I'm just going to see if my view already exists. So I'm just going to put an if statement here, and if it already exists we're going to drop it. We're going to be calling this view vwSummary. Because it's a view and you want to be able to determine what types of objects you've got in the database, if it is a view, standard naming convention is usually to start with the letters VW, and the object type would be simply just a V. So we'll say if the object ID is not null, we will drop the view vwSummary, which is what we're going to be creating in this case. And then to create a view, because it's an object, it's just simply the create view statement, and we're going to give it our name vwSummary. Now here we have the option to list our columns as well. So in this case it's going to be customer underscore ID, customer underscore name, order ID, order date, title, and paperback or hardback. So those are the columns that our view is actually going to return, and then it's simply the keyword as, and then we have our select statement underneath. So we're going to be now creating this as a view. So if I execute that query, I've got the message there to say the command was completed successfully. Now what I can do is actually look at that view. So instead of writing out this query again, in this case we need to look at 4 tables, I can just simply write a select. I'm just going to copy the column names from our view. So it's just going to be from vwSummary. And if I execute that query now, I can see I've got the same result set. I'll just run both of those queries, so the query from the view and the original select statement. And we can see from the first one we've got 14 rows, and from the actual view itself we've got 14 rows, so we know that's returning the correct amount of data. What I'm also going to show you guys is the execution plan for these 2 queries. So I've got the actual execution plan stored. So this is the first query, which is just our standard select statement. Don't worry too much about this now, I just want to show you that the database engine is performing exactly the same. So that's our first select, and then if we scroll down to our second select, we can see the way those 2 queries are executed is exactly the same. Because when we're working with views, we are just simply storing the query. It's effectively a virtual table, so we're not actually storing that data anywhere. When we run the view, it knows it's got to go and run that query. It's not actually that data stored as a separate object somewhere in the database. So it's important to remember that a view is just simply a stored query that when you run it, it tells SQL that it will run the original query. SQL knows that it needs to run that original query. Or you can say it's stored as a virtual table, so the data isn't actually there, it goes back and builds that query for you. What we can also do with views as well is add a where clause. So in this case, I'm just going to select again from the view, and I'm going to say where our customer ID equals 1. And I'm just going to run that query again from our view, and we've got the correct data there. So when we add a where clause in the background, that query is put together for us. Again, it's going to be running combining those four tables together and applying that where clause for us. It's not stored, the data is not stored within the view. So views can be extremely beneficial for solving complex queries. Admittedly, this is not the most complex query I've ever come across, but I could use a view for way more complex queries as well. So when we're normalizing data within a database, we ensure data integrity and protect against data duplication, which can sometimes make our queries quite complex. So being able to work with views is very useful to simplify that process. For example, our orders table, we've got that in an orders table, which is like a summary table of the order, which just includes totals, and then we have an order details table which breaks that down even further. We could also have further tables just for that entity, so views are very beneficial for simplifying our queries. And as mentioned before in the slideshow, I don't have to give these users don't have to access the underlying tables. They can just simply do that through the view, so that can be quite beneficial for security purposes as well. Now we're going to move on to altering views now. So when we're working with any objects, we've got the create. To create the view, we can alter it with the alter statement, or we can drop the view as I've used at the top of the page as well. So what we're going to do, we're going to alter this view, and we're going to have a look at schema binding and what that does. So we're going to alter the view, and we're going to add in the keyword underneath our column list with schema binding. So if I just execute that query now, okay, that's completed successfully. Now what that does is that prevents any changes to the underlying table that would stop this view from working. Because what can happen sometimes is when we create a view, there can be changes to those underlying tables that would stop this view from working, or it might return data that's really not relevant to us that the user cannot see. There's a problem there. So I'll go through an example. So we've added that with schema binding, so any changes to these columns within the underlying base tables should now be prevented, and we'll just have a look at that. So I'm going to run an alter table statement against our customers table, and we're going to try and alter the column C first name. I'll just open up the column list down on the left hand side. So in our customers table, we've got that column C first name as a varchar 15. It doesn't allow nulls. Let's see if we can change that to an nvarchar 100. So we're going to change the data type of this column. We do have our view created with schema binding, and we'll see how that affects any changes to this table. So if I execute this query now, we can see we've got an error message to say the object vwSummary is dependent on that column. That's failed because one or more objects access this column. So if you set up your view with schema binding, any changes that you need to make to the underlying base tables, you would need to alter that view to prevent schema binding, or drop that view completely and recreate it after those table changes are done. Let's have a look at another column. We have here our middle name column. which is currently set as an nvarchar 100. So let's try and alter that column, which is not referenced within our view, and we'll change that to a varchar 50. That column does allow nulls because not everybody has a middle name, and we'll just run that query now, and we can see that's completed successfully. So it's only the columns that would affect the actual view itself that are protected with schema binding. So schema binding is very useful for protecting our views, and if you are studying for the Microsoft certifications, it definitely will come up with some objects as to what it does. They'll probably have a query there where they create a view with schema binding and then try to make changes to one of those columns in the table, and there'll probably be a question on there to see what happens, to see if those changes can go ahead. So we're also going to look at another option with views, which is the encryption option. And first of all, I'm just going to write a query against the sysmodules system table, just to show you what the view looks like as a stored object. So we'll just go through sys.object so we can identify the object ID. Sys.SQL modules, and we'll alias this as B because they've both got object ID as columns, and we'll just join those on the object ID. Now I only have one view in this database at the moment, so I can just say where the type equals V. So if I run that query now, we can see our definition there, which stores the text. If you're not familiar with sys.SQL modules, it can be quite useful to identify. It's a very expensive query, but if you ever need to look at a database to see when certain tables are being referenced within different objects, for example, I might look at a table and can see there's a problem with that table, but I don't know where the problem's coming from, and I want to find all objects that reference that table, maybe perform any DML statements against that table. I'd always run a like against the SQL_modules sys view. Can be quite an expensive query, so I wouldn't recommend running it on a production server, but if you've got a local copy of that and want to find out the objects that reference that table. You can also view dependencies, but that doesn't always return the correct information. It will return anything that looks on that. If you're looking for particular queries where it inserts data or anything like that, it can be beneficial to query against this text in here. So we can see our definition is stored in this table anyway. But now we're going to alter the view again, and we're going to change it from schema binding, and this time we're going to set it as encryption. So I'm going to execute this alter view statement here, and if I execute that, I'm then going to go back down to the bottom and run the definition query again, and we can now see that's returned as null. So encryption will hide that definition, and it will prevent the view from being published as part of replication as well. So those are two important things to look at with objects, particularly views: the schema binding and the encryption options as well. So now we're going to move on to another view. We want to look at our books table, and we want to add a where clause to this view. So again, we're just going to use the create view statement. I would normally write to see if this would already exist, but for speed I'm not going to do that. I've demonstrated that at the top with the first query. So we're going to call this view low stock, and all we want to know is the title of our book and the stock as well. Now, one thing I also want to demonstrate here is when you list the columns, that also saves you the need to alias them. So as you can see here, I'm going to select the title and the stock amount, and that's going to be from dbo.Books, and I'm going to add a where clause into this select. So within the actual select statement, we can do pretty much anything we would do within a standard select statement. There are limitations. For example, if we're using an order by clause, we need to make sure we've got the top selection in there as well. So this is going to be just a simple example of where the stock is less than or equal to 5, so we may need to order more copies of that book. So we'll just run the select initially. We've got 4 books there, so we'll create that as a view. And you can see I haven't aliased any columns within this select, but I have within the actual create view statement. And then if I run just a select title and stock from our newly created view, and that's called vwLowStock. Let's just execute that query and we get the same results. Now to drop a view, again it's just simply the drop view statement and then the view name, so in this case vwLowStock, and we're just going to drop that. We'll also look at another example, so we're going to have a look at the orders table. And then in this case we're going to be looking at grouping within a view as well. So we've got a few orders in here and we want to find out the total amount per customer. So what we're going to be doing is selecting our customer ID. That is what we're going to be using for the grouping in this case, and then we want to sum on the order total column. We want to find out the total amount spent per customer, and then we're just going to group by our customer ID. Okay, and then we're going to simply create that as a view. So we'll create that as a view, vw totals. Now the column list is optional, we don't actually have to enter that, but we want to alias our columns that we want to be returned within the view here. So if I just create that as a view now, and then I'll just query that view, and again just to select from that column, and we can add our where clause, so where total is greater than 50, and we get the correct results returned. And again, if I wanted to drop that view, it'd just be the simple drop view and our view name. I hope you have enjoyed that video on views, guys. We will be going a lot more deeper into the world of views. We'll be looking at updatable views, index views and partitions views as well. Index views are very exciting. I do enjoy working with them myself. If you are new to the channel, do check out my other videos if you're interested in SQL development, writing SQL statements, business intelligence. There is a lot more content coming soon. I do upload videos regularly, and if you are in the process of studying for any Microsoft certifications, there is a lot of great content on there. Do subscribe to the channel and also click that notification button to be made aware of when new videos are uploaded. Thanks a lot for watching.